Welcome to the Hacks Roundup for May of 2023. Today we'll be discussing the largest smart contract hacks in May. We'll talk about the root cause of these hacks, how they may have been prevented, as well as incident response. Now, May of 2023 saw over $20 million worth of assets lost due to smart contract hacks. Over $55 million was lost just due to rug pulls and exit scams. Of the funds lost, at least $5.5 million was recovered. Now, the vast majority of smart contract hacks in May were on DeFi protocols. The largest smart contract hack in May happened on the Jimbo protocol. The protocol's token, called Jimbo, features a floor price mechanism which maintains a dynamic minimum price. This floor price mechanism aims to reduce the risk of downward price movement without limiting the token price's growth. The initial version of the protocol was deployed on May 16th. However, the developers noticed some problems with this initial version, and so after a few updates, Jimbo v2 was launched on May 25th. Sadly, just a few days after the launch, the protocol was exploited through an economic manipulation attack, resulting in a loss of $7.5 million worth of Ether. Now, the Jimbo protocol allows a user to swap ETH for Jimbo or vice versa. This means that the protocol must support both ETH and Jimbo liquidity, which it does through its liquidity bins shown in the diagram. Each of these liquidity bins represents a different price for Jimbo in terms of ETH. The leftmost bin over here represents the cheapest price, and the rightmost bin represents the most expensive price. 50% of the protocol's Jimbo is evenly distributed over the first 50 bins, and the remaining 50% is all placed within the 51st bin over here. Now, there are a few important bins here which we need to define. First, we have the active bin. The active bin is the current bin that is being used for swapping ETH to Jimbo or vice versa. The active bin can actually change depending on swaps made by users. For example, if a user swaps their ETH for all the Jimbo within the active bin is going to shift forward. However, if the user swaps their Jimbo for all the ETH within the active bin will shift backwards. Next, we have the trigger bin. The trigger bin is originally set to be 4 bins ahead of the active bin. The trigger bin represents the price threshold at which the protocol can rebalance its ETH liquidity. Now, we mentioned before that the active bin can change. Remember that in the previous diagram, the active bin was this first bin over here, however, it seems to be the 7th bin. Now, this could happen if users purchase all the Jimbo in these first 6 bins over here. However, notice that this active bin has now moved past the trigger bin. Now, whenever this happens, whenever the active bin moves past the trigger bin, any user can call the shift function on the protocol to rebalance liquidity to support the current active bin. Now, when shift is called, the active bin itself doesn't change. However, the trigger bin is shifted to be 4 bins ahead of the active bin. Also, the ETH in the protocol is redistributed. So it's redistributed to this newly created floor bin as well as these newly created anchor bins over here. 90% of the protocol's ETH goes into the floor bin. So the price of the floor bin is calculated by taking that 90% of the protocol's ETH and dividing it by the circulating supply of Jimbo. The remaining 10% of ETH goes into these anchor bins over here. And the purpose of these anchor bins is to support the current price of Jimbo as represented by this active bin. Essentially, these anchor bins provide liquidity support for the current price. But what happens if the users swap their Jimbo for all the ETH within these anchor bins? Well, then the ETH within these anchor bins will be depleted. And so when this happens, the protocol considers this a sign that the current floor price is unstable. And so it allows any user to call the reset function. The reset function will reset the floor price as well as the liquidity distribution. The first thing that happens when reset is called is a new floor bin is created. The price of this floor bin is calculated by taking all the ETH within the protocol and dividing it by the circulating supply of Jimbo. This floor bin is also immediately set to be the active bin, and it contains all the ETH within the protocol. Also, the Jimbo within the protocol is redistributed to the original distribution. So we have these 50 bins over here, each of which has 1% of the protocol's Jimbo, and the 51st bin, which has 50% of the protocol's Jimbo. So let's see how the attacker used all these functions in order to execute the hack. So the attacker starts by taking a flash loan of ETH. In fact, they borrow 10,000 ETH. They swap a small amount of this ETH for Jimbo tokens. They then add these Jimbo tokens at a very highly priced bin, which they themselves have created. Note that this very highly priced bin has a price that is much higher than this 51st bin. The next step over here is that the attacker purchases all the Jimbo from the first 51 bins of the protocol. And it also purchases the hacker also purchases one token from this very highly priced bin, which they themselves added. And so the average buy price for Jimbo over here is around here. This is the lowest price here, this is the highest price. The average purchase price for the hacker here is somewhere around here. And note that this price here is much, much lower than the price of this highly priced bin over here. And this difference is going to become important later on. Now, because the hacker purchased one token from this very highly priced bin, it has now become the active bin. And this active bin is way ahead of the trigger bin over here. And so the attacker can now call the shift function to redistribute the ETH liquidity of the protocol. 90% of the ETH is distributed to a newly created floor bin, and 10% of the ETH is distributed to these newly created anchor bins over here. Note that there's a very large gap here between the floor bin price and the anchor bin price. Recall that when the attacker purchased Jimbo in the previous step, their average purchase price was much, much less than the price of this active bin. And so this is reflected in the discrepancy between the price of this floor bin and these anchor bins over here. These anchor bins offer a sell price for the Jimbo tokens, which is far higher than the price at which the attacker bought these tokens from the protocol. So what the attacker does next is essentially steals the ETH from the protocol by swapping the Jimbo at the inflated value of these anchor bins over here. Essentially, the attacker bought Jimbo at a low price and has now sold Jimbo at a very high price to the protocol, effectively extracting ETH from the protocol. And what happens here is the anchor bins have been depleted, but the hacker wants to continue their attack. So they need to reset the distribution. And since the anchor bins over here have been depleted, they can call the reset function. When the reset function is called, the distribution is reset. And it now looks similar to when the hacker originally started their hack. And so the hacker can proceed to repeat the very same steps we've already discussed in order to drain more ETH from the protocol. Now, the hack occurred 3 days after the protocol was deployed, and the hypernative threat intelligence platform detected the deployment of the malicious attack contract 7 minutes before the actual hack occurred. 2 hours after the exploit occurred, it was reported on Twitter, and a few hours after that, the team officially confirmed the hack. The team also tried to negotiate with the exploiter through on-chain messages in order to return funds in exchange for a bounty. However, unfortunately, the attacker did not respond. So the Jimbo team posted an open 800K bounty for any information leading to the exploiter's arrest and the recovery of funds. As we mentioned before, the threat intelligence platform Hypernative detected the malicious attack contract 7 minutes before the actual hack transaction. So protocols could use monitoring software like this in order to prevent hacks before they actually happen, or essentially preempt these hacks by pausing the protocol. Also, the Jimbo protocol had not received an audit. Now, while this was clearly documented in the Jimbo protocol's documentation, an audit is definitely recommended when deploying a protocol that's going to handle a significant amount of funds, and especially if it introduces a novel pricing mechanism. Threat modeling may have also helped to detect this issue by understanding which parts of the protocol might have been vulnerable to manipulation. Economic analysis may have also helped to detect this issue before it happened. In particular, stress testing this protocol under different economic conditions may have helped to reveal this vulnerability. Let's move on to the second largest hack in May, which happened on Deus Finance. Now, Deus is a derivatives exchange deployed on many different chains, including Phantom, Ethereum, Arbitrum, and Binance Smart Chain. It features 3 protocol-specific tokens: Deus, XDeus, and most importantly, DAI. Deus is the governance token of Deus Finance. XDAIS is the fee accrual token of the protocol, and most importantly, DAI is the stablecoin of the protocol. Now, in April of 2023, the DAI token was upgraded on multiple chains. And less than a month later, the protocol was hacked for $6.5 million on Arbitrum, Binance Smart Chain, as well as Ethereum. Now, the root cause of this hack lies within the burn from function within the DAI token. This burn from function allows a user to burn tokens from another user's account. However, the account being burned from must have approved the burner to spend these tokens. The approvals are tracked within the allowance mapping shown here. The first key of this mapping is the actual owner of the tokens, and the second key is the spender of the tokens or the burner of the tokens. However, notice here when the allowances mapping is accessed, the first key provided is message sender. Message sender is the person who is burning the tokens, not the owner of the tokens. And then the second key provided is account. This is the owner of the tokens rather than the spender or burner of the tokens. So these two keys have been reversed. So prior to calling the burn from function, the hacker sets this value over here by approving this account to spend the hacker's tokens. And in fact, the hacker approves this account here to spend a very large number of tokens from their account. And so as a result, the number here that's red is a very large number. And in the next step over here, we see that an approval happens whereby the hacker, which is message sender, is approved to transfer a massive amount of tokens from this account over here. And so this allows the hacker to essentially transfer tokens, DAI tokens, from anyone's account. Let's see how they use this to execute the hack. So the hacker starts by approving the DAI USDC Chronos pair for the maximum amount of DAI. Chronos is a decentralized exchange on Arbitrum. Next, the attacker calls that vulnerable burn from function, which we saw before. Now, as a result of the bug in the burn from function, this call results in the attacker being approved to spend all the DAI tokens from the DAI USDC Chronos pair. Next, the attacker transfers almost all the DAI tokens from this pair. In fact, they only leave one way worth of DAI tokens in this pair. Next, the attacker forcefully updates the reserves. So essentially what they've done here is they've updated the reserve for DAI in the DEX pair to be one way because that's all that's left in the pair, and the USDC reserve remains the same. So this means that you can now swap a small amount of DAI for a very large amount of USDC. And in fact, in the fifth step, the attacker simply swaps all of their DAI for USDC, effectively removing almost all the USDC from the pair. Now, Hypernative, the threat intelligence platform, flagged the attack contract 6 minutes before the exploit. And the exploit was run on multiple chains. In particular, on Binance Smart Chain, it was front-run, and the front-runner actually returned most of the funds. Now, following the initial hack, various white hat rescues ensued, and these white hat hackers were able to rescue several funds that were still at risk and return them later on to the protocol. By the 4-hour mark, the protocol had been paused, and the hack had been announced by the team on Twitter. Now, the team advertised a bug bounty of 20% for any returned funds, and most of the funds were in fact returned. So $5.5 million worth of funds were recovered, which is most of what was hacked. The original hack had around $6.5 million lost. There is a reimbursement plan in progress, however, it has not taken effect yet. Now, this type of hack can be prevented through thorough access control testing on all functions which require privileged access. In the case of the burn from function, it would be worth testing that the user who is calling this function has enough approval to burn these tokens. And so this type of a test would have detected the vulnerability. Also, the updated version of the code here of the DAI token had not been audited. And so generally speaking, updated versions of contracts should be treated with the same level of care and security as the original contract. Also, functionality related to burning and approvals should be treated with extra care, and many different tests should be added to ensure that this functionality works as expected. Also, since this burn from function wasn't doing anything particularly special, and audited library contracts such as OpenZeppelin's ERC20 burnable may have helped to prevent the need for custom code and the introduction of this bug. Another notable hack in May affected the Tornado Cash protocol. Tornado Cash is a non-custodial, fully decentralized mixing service. On May 20th, a hacker used a metamorphic proposal contract to take control of Tornado Cash's governance. The attacker made a profit of approximately $1 million by stealing the governance vault's torn tokens. Fortunately, funds within the mixing pools of Tornado Cash were not affected. On May 13th, the attacker introduced a seemingly innocent contract upgrade which was proposed to penalize dishonest relayers. However, the attacker also introduced a small one-liner function in the proposal contract. This function allowed the attacker to destroy the proposal contract, and this played an important part in the hack. Now, in order to explain this hack, we first need to review the create and create2 opcodes. Both these opcodes can be used to create smart contracts. However, these two opcodes differ very much in the way they generate contract addresses. Let's start with create. Create generates a contract address based on the sender and the nonce. This means that each time the sender calls create, the nonce is incremented, and so the generated contract address is different. However, if this sender happens to be a contract that can be self-destructed, the nonce can be effectively reset. Thus, it is possible for the sender to deploy the same contract twice using the create opcode, assuming that the first contract that was deployed has been self-destructed. Let's move on to create2. Create2 generates an address based on a domain separator, the sender, some salt, and the bytecode of the deployed contract. The generation of the address is not dependent on a nonce, and so create2 allows for the creation of a contract at the same address twice if the first deployment has already been destroyed. And it's important to note that create2 cannot be used to deploy different code to the same address because the address generation is dependent on the bytecode. And so this is why this hack required both create and create2 in order to be executed. The attacker started by creating a deployer contract using create2. This deployer contract also had a self-destruct function which was to be used later. Next, the deployer contract is used to deploy the faulty proposal contract. Remember that this proposal contract had the self-destruct function within it. Then the attacker waits for the proposal to be passed, and after that happens, the attacker simply self-destructs both the proposal contract and the deployer contract. In step 4, the attacker redeploys the deployer contract via create2 at the exact same address. However, this has the effect of resetting the nonce for this deployer contract. And so now this deployer contract can deploy a malicious proposal contract using the create opcode to the same address as the previous proposal contract. Now, once this malicious proposal is executed, the attacker granted themselves vote majority and stole the torn tokens from the protocol. The hostile takeover happened on May 20th. The attack was first analyzed by Sam Sun via a Twitter thread, and once the proposal passed, there was really nothing anyone could do to restore the governance themselves. Unfortunately, the torn token was also impacted, and the price has not yet recovered. Also, on the day after the hack, the hacker published a proposal that would actually restore control to the original governance token holders, and this proposal successfully passed on May 26th. Since then, the governance for Tornado Cash has been fully operational once again. Now, part of the cause here is that there's not many tools available to review the diff of contract upgrades which are part of the proposal, and this allows these malicious upgrades to slip through the review process. Also, proposal upgrades should never contain self-destruct, call code, or delegate call. Same for create2. Also, more caution should be used if the proposal is not well documented. Proposal audits may also help to verify the legitimacy of proposals and the security of their changes. Finally, a standardized process can help to avoid malicious proposals from being executed. For example, Compound CIP dedicated to proposal review. Level Finance was also the target of an exploit in May. Level Finance is a perpetual DEX deployed on the Binance Smart Chain which offers zero price impact trades. The protocol allows traders to leverage their position by up to 30x in both long and short directions. The protocol was exploited on May 1st through the referral reward mechanism, and this resulted in a loss of 1.1 million. The root cause was within the claim multiple function. This function could be used to claim rewards from multiple epochs at the same time. More importantly, it could also be used to claim rewards from the same epoch multiple times. The contract tracks how much the user has already claimed for the epoch in the user's mapping. This is to ensure that the user can't claim the same rewards multiple times. However, once more rewards have accumulated for this epoch, the user can call the claim multiple function a second time. And on the second call, rather than adding the newly claimed amount to the previously claimed amount, the newly claimed amount replaces the previously claimed amount. And so the number tracked here is less than the tokens which have actually been claimed by the user. And so the user is actually able to claim the rewards multiple times. The hacker exploited this fact by calling the claim multiple function several times in order to drain the contract of reward tokens. Now, this hack was actually attempted unsuccessfully 7 days before it was successfully executed. Hypernative actually detected this failed attempt, and so monitoring technologies such as Hypernative can be used to prevent these hacks before they actually occur. Next, we have WDZD on the Binance Smart Chain, which is a decentralized exchange. Now, WDZD's contracts are unverified and there's little to no documentation available. However, we can get a good idea of what happened just by going through the transaction trace over here. The sender is the attacker. The receiver is the attack contract. So some function is called on the attack contract, which in turn calls some function on a protocol contract. Now, this protocol contract is going to make a call to swap LP. Swap LP is essentially the DEX pair which contains WDZD and ETH. And this function is going to do something strange. It's going to transfer all the WDZD in this DEX pair to this protocol contract. And so there's no WDZD left in the DEX pair now. Only ETH is left in the DEX pair. The attacker then transfers a small amount of WDZD to this DEX pair. And at the end over here, we can see that reserve 0, which represents ETH, is much larger than reserve 1, which is represented by WDZD. And so after these balances have been manipulated, the attacker is able to swap a small amount of WDZD for a very large amount of ETH. And at the bottom here, we can see that more than half of the ETH in the DEX pair has already been drained. Next, we have the CS token, which was deployed on Binance Smart Chain. This exploit happened within 5 hours of the token being deployed. The funds were stolen from the PancakeSwap pair with CS and USDT. So the attacker started by selling CS tokens for USDT in PancakeSwap. Now, there is this transfer function within the token contract which is invoked whenever CS token transfers happen. And so, of course, it's invoked when the CS token is sold for USDT. It's important to note here that the sync function may be called when this transfer function is called, but we'll look at this later. For now, it's important to note that the sell amount has been updated with the amount that has been sold in PancakeSwap. Next, the attacker is going to transfer CS tokens to themselves. And when they do this, this transfer function is going to be invoked. And importantly, the sync function will also be invoked. So let's see what the sync function does. The sync function calculates the amount to burn based on the sell amount. Now, this sell amount is non-zero as we saw in the previous slide because the hacker sold some CS tokens for USDT, and so this value was set. So this burn amount is non-zero, and this burn amount is actually used to burn CS tokens from the PancakeSwap pair. So basically, the CS token balance of the PancakeSwap pair has now decreased. So you can probably already get a sense here that the hacker is trying to manipulate the CS token balances within the PancakeSwap pair. This is exactly what they do by repeating this process. Basically, they sell tokens, they sell CS tokens on PancakeSwap, and then they do a self-transfer, and this results in the balance of CS token in the PancakeSwap pair decreasing again and again, and once this balance is low enough, the attacker is able to swap a small amount of CS token for most of the USDT in the pool. Next up, we have the Eldorado exchange on Arbitrum, which was hacked for approximately 580K. In this case, the team introduced some functionality to update the price manually. So this functionality was part of the router signed contract, which is actually an unverified contract. So the way it works is the admin creates some signature and calls some unknown function on the router signed contract with this signature. The router signed contract in turn will call the update with sig function on the price feed, and the price feed will update the prices. Now, what the hacker did is they also called the same function on the router sign contract, and they submitted the signature that was previously used by the admin. And they were able to do this because there was no replay protection present for the signature. And so the hacker was able to manipulate these prices using this method and extract funds from the protocol. Here's the code in the protocol which verifies the signature. You can see that there's no mention of a nonce or any other kind of replay protection. And so the hacker was able to reuse the admin signature. The hacker's method of extracting funds from the protocol was to continuously increase and decrease their position. And when they increased their position, they used a different price. So here we have this token 0x82, and the price used here is not this 189, it's this 264, which is used when increasing the position. However, when decreasing the position, the attacker is going to use the smaller price over here for 0x82. This is more like 188 over here. And so the discrepancy between these prices is used by the attacker to extract funds from the protocol by repeatedly increasing and decreasing their position. Unfortunately, there were a lot of rug pulls and scams in May. The largest one by far was Fintosh. Fintosh was initially advertised as a lending platform with 1% yield per day. They falsely claimed to be affiliated with Morgan Stanley, however, Morgan Stanley publicly repudiated this. And also, the Singapore Securities Authority issued warnings about Fintosh. Fintosh produced many professionally made videos of company events with paid actors acting as leadership, including the CEO, director, and various other positions. Fintosh is very reminiscent of BitConnect because it heavily relies on MLM. Next, we have Zertam on Arbitrum. This protocol was advertised as a decentralized reputation-building platform, and it raised funds from users. These funds were then just taken out of the contract and moved into Binance. Fortunately, Binance did freeze these funds, and hopefully they will be returned to the original owners at some point. Next, we have SwapRum, which is a DEX on Arbitrum. This was a rug pull for $3 million worth of assets. The protocol contract was upgraded by adding a malicious function called add, and this function allowed for the stealing of users' LP tokens, which were subsequently used to drain liquidity from the protocol. Here are some smaller exploits which we saw in May. First up, we have Block Forest, which was a reward manipulation bug which the attacker was able to execute by decreasing an important variable which controlled the reward calculation. Then we have Snooker. In the case of Snooker, rewards were determined by the parent-child relationships of smart contracts, and the attacker was able to manipulate these relationships in order to steal excessive rewards. Then we have Land NFT, which had a publicly accessible mint function. The attacker minted over 200 NFTs and traded them for other tokens. Next, we have Local Traders, or LCT. In this case, the Oracle price for LCT was set to one way, and so many LCT tokens were bought very cheaply and then dumped. The Mellow token also had a publicly accessible mint function. Here are a few other hacks which happened in May. First, we have Trust the Trident, which was another reward manipulation hack due to insufficient validation. Then we have Neverfall, which was caused by price manipulation due to relying on the spot balances of the PancakeSwap pool. And then we have a couple of tokens here, LW token as well as GPT token, which were both hacked because of the manipulation of the token balances within the DEX pools. Then we have Lunify, which was another reward manipulation hack whereby user stakes had no time locks, and so users were able to repeatedly claim rewards. Let's talk about some of the trends we've seen in May. First off, Hypernative preemptively flagged suspicious transactions prior to 3 of the 7 largest hacks. This tells us that this type of monitoring software can be used to prevent these hacks before they actually happen. Also, Hypernative immediately detected at least 3 of the 7 largest hacks, and so monitoring technology can be used to respond to these hacks faster even if they are not prevented. Also, at least 2 protocols recovered most of the funds that were hacked by negotiating a bug bounty. So this includes Deus DAO as well as the Eldorado exchange. Another big trend in May was price manipulation hacks. 5 of the 7 largest hacks we talked about were caused by price manipulation, and at least 9 hacks in total in May were caused by price manipulation. However, these price manipulation hacks were caused by many different root causes, and so the most common cause actually in May was the manipulation of the balance ratio within index pools. This was the case for the Deus hack, WDZD, the CS token, and several other protocols that were hacked in May. Also, some protocols were hacked by force updating a price through admin functionality. So this happened for the Eldorado exchange as well as a couple of smaller protocols. In the case of Jimbo, the novel pricing mechanism for the Jimbo token was manipulated in order to hack the protocol. Often it was the prices of protocol-specific tokens that were manipulated, so this includes Jimbo, the Day token of Deus, and WDZD. Another trend that we've seen throughout this year and continues this month is that many upgraded contracts were hacked. In fact, at least 3 of the largest hacks were caused by vulnerabilities introduced by upgrades. In most cases, these upgrades had not been audited, and at least 2 of these hacks happened within 1 month of the upgrade. So this just tells us that attackers are monitoring for vulnerable upgrades and they exploit these very quickly. Here are some other trends that we've seen in May. At least 3 derivatives protocols were hacked. This includes Deus, Level, and Eldorado Exchange. 2 of these were actually GMX forks, so we have Level Finance and Eldorado Exchange. Also, many smaller hacks involving tokens on Binance Smart Chain were present during this month. This is something we do see most of the time, however, this month there seemed to be more than usual. Also, multiple hacks involved issues with public burn or mint functions. This brings us to the end of May. In June, we're going to be covering the Atomic Wallet hack, Atlantis loans, and more. Thanks so much for joining us. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments, and if not, check out our socials for more security content, our Twitter at Quantstamp and our YouTube at Quantstamp HQ.